Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends. Welcome to this May 7, 2015 edition of Nightcast. At least 29 tornadoes have been reported across central U.S. states amid heavy rain and flash flooding in Oklahoma. The tornadoes caused destruction to many homes and disrupted travel, with all flights from Will Rogers World Airport being canceled. We've got a report from BBC Weather.
With heavy rain and tornadoes causing havoc across Kansas, Nebraska, Texas and Oklahoma. Well, the tornadoes flipped cars, downed power lines and even provided a window of escape for some of the wildlife at a nearby zoo. Well, Sarah Keith Lucas from BBC Weather is here to tell us more and take us through some astonishing pictures you have.
Absolutely, Matthew. And Oklahoma was hardest hit, some significant disruption there, but it wasn't just Oklahoma. In fact, we saw at least 50 tornadoes reported across the central states, including a massive twister which touched down southwest of Oklahoma City. Now, no deaths were reported, but several people were injured due to flying debris. Will Rogers World Airport cancelled all flights throughout the evening and passengers were evacuated to the pedestrian tunnel for 30 minutes as the storms passed through. Now, bears and tigers were even able to escape briefly from the Tiger Safari Park after a tornado struck the city of Tyrol. Unfortunately, it wasn't just tornadoes that Oklahoma faced. Heavy rain caused severe disruption and the National Weather Service quickly issued a flash flood emergency warning, the first kind in the city's history. Now, the measured rainfall in the day for Oklahoma City was 7.1 inches, a staggering difference to the previous record of 2.6 inches that was set back in 1930. Further thunderstorms, hail and heavy rain have hampered emergency services from fully assessing the damage, and central states remain on tornado watch into the weekend too. So let's take a look at what's causing all this severe weather. Well, it's not unusual for this time of year. Often in spring we get big contrast between colder air piling in from the north and warm, moist air pushing up from the Gulf of Mexico. Where the two air masses meet, we get these strong weather fronts pushing their way eastwards, bringing those large thunderstorms, hail and that risk of tornadoes. As you can see, a big contrast in temperatures, 7 degrees or so in Winnipeg, 29 in Atlanta. And we're going to continue to see further big thunderstorms, heavy showers and that tornado threat continuing through the course of the weekend as the storms push east. So severe thunderstorms still on the cards over the next few days, possibly some further flooding and once again that threat of tornadoes. But May is the peak month for tornadoes, so we're not out of the woods just yet, Matthew.
Sarah, thanks very much. I don't like the sound of those bears and tigers, indeed, for all of that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for all that terrible weather, those who are responsible for it. You know, last night I spent some time, friends, going over how, well, I told you last night, too, how I have to change the banks for our camera shots after our first one, or else I can't go some of the shots I want. I told you last night how God controls the weather. We mentioned that. We've shown scriptures here before that show very much, scripture after scripture, how God is in ultimate control of the weather. And there's a prophecy in Leviticus 26 verse 4 where God says, if you obey me, I'll give you rain in due season. There's another verse telling you God is in control of the weather. And that comment that he says, I'll give you rain in due season, that's verse 4 of Leviticus 26, is saying, I'll give you just the right amount of rain. Not too little so that you've got drought, and not too much so that you've got floods. And Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. I wanted to flip there and make sure I'm telling you correct verse number for Leviticus 26. Yeah, it's verse 4. Then he says, if you walk in my statutes, keep my commandments, diligently hearken to my voice. He says in the parallel chapter of Deuteronomy 28. But verse 4 of Leviticus 26, he says, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then, verse 4, Leviticus 26, I will give you rain in due season, And the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Fruit trees got to have just the right amount of water. Too little, they get brittle, they dry up. Too much, they're killed and they die. Friends, we're going next to a story in Europe that affects the fifth seal, the time when, as Jesus Christ described it, would be a time of trouble so great that none like it, no trouble like it has ever been so bad since the beginning of the world to this time, no nor ever shall be, Christ said. And he referred to it as a time of mega trouble, great tribulation. More than the trouble that's mentioned as part of the fourth seal when Christ said in Matthew 13, verse 8, he mentioned Tyrol would be one of the events we should be watching for between the third and the fifth seal. Meaning trouble, troubled waters, both literally and figuratively, mob, seditions, just all kinds of trouble, but not the mega trouble, the time of Jacob's trouble, a time of trouble that's like none before it, like none after it will ever be again. A time that, as if we come out and then, let's go into these pictures on the wall over here. If we go into this crown of the Holy Roman Empire picture right here in the center, we can see that it's labeled here as Christ described it in plain language, Great Tribulation. It's labeled as the time of World War III. Once that seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire is crowned, he will commence World War III. He will also hold martyrdom against any whom the Catholic Church announces as anathema, which will be those who refuse to work on the Sabbath or to bow down before the image of the beast. And it'll be a time of two witnesses out giving great testimony. It'll be the time when those who do what Christ said do in Luke 21, verse 36, to watch and pray, watch these first four seals and pray about all these things. And he says, those people will be accounted worthy to escape. Now, leading up to the Pope flying to Frankfurt, Germany, and holding the coronation ceremony to put this crown on the seventh and final head of an emperor, a dictator, a leader the Bible calls the beast, to become the seventh head of the Holy Roman Empire. Leading up to that time, there are some events we're watching in Europe, including the one that involves Greece. And in today's news is a story that says fears are that Greece is running out of money, and the fears are intensifying.
A medical centre run entirely by volunteers. Medicines donated from anyone who can afford it to people without insurance who no longer have access to the state health system.
The Greek state has borrowed billions and billions of euros in order to fund the banks, and at the same moment they're denying people access to the public health system.
No one is quite sure where all this is heading. A government under huge pressure from its creditors, looking for spare cash wherever it can find it. It's 5 years almost to the day since Greece accepted its first huge international bailout, and for many people, things have just got worse and worse. And now it feels like the government faces a pretty stark choice in the next few weeks. Either accept a deal which looks suspiciously like the old bailout, austerity and all, or Greece will have to default on its debts.
I certainly wouldn't choose bankruptcy. It's just that large parts of society can't take anymore. There are still Greeks who can afford to pay. Some of them want to help and some of them don't. But many people are going to be in serious trouble if austerity continues.
What comes next is hard to judge. Predictions of an imminent euro exit in Greece have been wrong in the past. But this time the ideological divide is deeper. Simply staying in the single currency has become a mighty struggle. Chris Morris, BBC News, Athens.
Okay, friends, and there have been story after story in news currently that relate back to World War I and World War II. And as Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong put it, we are in the recess between round 2, as he called it, of World War, and round 3, just like a ring fight, where they have rounds and there's a little recess period between one round and the next. And that's where we are, between round 2 and round 3. And all kind of news stories are kind of bringing the points, the memory of World War I and World War II back to us in the past several days, the past week, and there's several in today's news. And it might be good reason for that, for us to be, maybe God is wanting us to be a little more on our knees and be very cognizant of the fact that He may be about to wrap things up and bring that monster United Europe into a 5 from the east, 5 from the west, whether that be countries or regions or rebordering of countries and land and leaders, and finally bring that 7th head of the Holy Roman Empire back out of the abyss, back out of the pit, back out of a dormant status. Well, it'll bring the Holy Roman Empire out of the pit, out of a dormant status. It'll be the first time for the 7th head. We don't know who that's going to be yet. We do know that the Roman Catholic Church will provide the leader who will be the false prophet who puts that crown on his head, whether it be the current pope or some other pope that suddenly comes on the scene. But today's story that relates to World War I comes out of a ceremony marking the 100-year anniversary of the Lucy, or the Lusitania. Let's go for that story.
Today was the day ordinary people gave voice to their grief and recollections of the Lusitania. And here in Cove Cathedral, for some, the passing of 100 years has changed little.
Today we commemorate, as you know, one of the darkest days of the last century, a day of infamy.
The Lusitania was fast, but couldn't escape a German U-boat attack. It sank in just 18 minutes. Sue Loader was among those in Cove to witness today's commemorations. Her grandparents, Frederick and Amy, and their 4 children, had been on board.
My grandmother saw the torpedo. She managed to get into a lifeboat. 2 of the children were saved. 2 of them sadly drowned, and my grandfather spent 3 hours in the water before he was rescued.
But 100 years on, the owner of the Lusitania has accused the Irish government of blocking attempts to dive on the wreck to find out what really happened.
It's totally irrational, the fact that we're being stopped. This is a major, major historical event. As we all know, it brought America into the war eventually. There was a few more things that had to happen, but and it needs to be put to rest.
But the Irish President, Michael Higgins, in Cove for today's commemorations, told me the Lusitania has to remain untouched.
It was, if you like, to assure respect. It also was to enable such investigation to take place in a regulated and a responsive environment.
In Liverpool, they've always called her Lucy, and today they remembered their dead by the Lusitania's propeller. Flowers for a century of grief. With the Lusitania, the rules of war were erased. Civilians became targets. Today, at the spot she sank, families came to remember the disaster that changed them and history. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News in Southern Ireland.
Thank you, Duncan Kennedy. Friends, as you could see in that video, thousands of people attended the ceremonies in Ireland and Liverpool to mark the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Lusitania, the Lucy. About 1,200 people died when the passenger liner was hit by a German torpedo off the Irish coast during World War I. No one knows why she sank in just 18 minutes, but there were reports of a second explosion shortly after the torpedo hit. And that's the story on that from today's news. Now, there's an unusual event related to World War out of Russia today. Russian prisoners at 3 jails in and around St. Petersburg are seen marching. They're marching to mark Victory Day, when World War II in Europe ended. This video, commissioned by the Directorate of the Federal Prison Service, UFSIN, shows them forming the words, "Thank you for victory." They also release gold and black balloons, the colors of the Russian military's St. George flag. Russia will hold a vast military parade on May 9, honoring the Soviet Red Army's triumph over Nazi Germany in 1945. UFSIN spokeswoman Yulia Alashina told the BBC that the inmates involved in the flash mob volunteered for it. They were in jail for relatively minor offenses, she added. Here go the orange and black balloons. Those are the inmates of 3 Russian jails there in today's parade. And friends, I don't have any notes for this next video, but it also relates to World War II, and a rescue mission in the Tyrol. Let's watch this one.
This is Itter, an Austrian village known for its beauty and its skiing, a village isolated from the hurly-burly of the world below. But for a few violent hours in 1945, the war intervened. Among the images of Itter's ancient castle in the village archive, 2 photos from the years when it became a high-security prison. Itter's hostages included 2 former French prime ministers and 2 captured army commanders. The final orders were clear. If the prisoners were of no use as a bargaining chip with Allied forces, they were to be executed. As the Allied armies got closer, the castle's guards fled. But there was still a real danger from bands of die-hard SS troops roaming these forests. So a member of staff, a Czech, decided to go for help. 5 miles down the valley, he found this man, Sepp Gangl, a veteran German officer now working with the Austrian resistance.
Gangl jumped in a Kubelwagen with a driver and a big white flag, and he went and found the closest American unit. And the person he found was a U.S. captain called Jack Lee.
Led by Lee and Gangl, a small group of US and German soldiers with 1 tank made their way to the castle. Within hours, they were surrounded and under attack from the SS. Though outnumbered, the GIs, Germans and elderly prisoners managed to hold out for 12 hours until an American relief column got through. Only 1 person lost their life inside Schloss Itter. Sepp Gangl would not return to his wife and young son.
Sepp Gangl was a very courageous man, and he did the right thing to the right time on the end of the war.
If the SS had managed to get into the castle and kill all these French VIPs, the history of post-war France would have been radically different. These people, several of them, formulated the policies that carried France into, well, the 21st century.
Today, Itter is just another village in a glorious landscape. But what happened here 70 years ago is more than a footnote to a world conflict. Robert Hall, BBC News, Austria.
And friends, while that was playing, I found some, and I'm trying to get our camera shot to come back out. Oh, back up, there we go. While that was playing, I found some notes related to the sinking of the Lusitania that brings some interesting facts to light. it seems that there was ammunition on board the ship, and the presence of that ammunition on the ship has led some to suggest that Germany legitimately identified the Lusitania as a war target, though, of course, that whole the question of the war on the part of Germany being legitimate is almost absurd to even state it that way. Nonetheless, at the time of the sinking of the Lusitania and the fact that there was some ammunition on board the ship, this passenger ship, where 1,200 people were killed, the existence of the shells on board the... Let me back something up. I need to just check myself. I know 1,200 is mentioned in this story. Let me see exactly if I've told you that correctly. Thousands of people are expected to gather today in Liverpool, in Ireland. Okay, nearly 1,200 people died when the passenger liner was hit by a German torpedo. So not quite 1,200, but pretty close to 1,200. Now, the British government kept the existence of the shells, ammunition shells on board the passenger liner. They kept it a secret. The British government did. The American owner of the wreck has called on the Irish government, as you saw in the video a moment ago, to allow artifacts to be removed from the vessel to try to find out what caused the second explosion, to give families the fullest possible explanation of how and why their loved ones died, as the story goes. But I thought I'd just share with you that fact that we do know that there was some ammunition on board the Lusitania, and the British government kept that a secret for a long time. Well, friends, it's Thursday night. We're off now until Sunday night. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back with the events in world news between now and Sunday night. If we're not back for some reason, I've got a slide I'm going to show you here real quick. If we suddenly disappear, the land that I've been telling you about that's described in Daniel 11, verses 40, 41, 42, while I've got that slide on the screen, I'm going to read that to you right directly from Daniel 11. If you want to flip there with me, I'm going to Daniel, and it's right after Ezekiel, and chapter 11, and in verse 41 we want to go to, where it says, well, let's back up to verse 40. And at the time of the end, now that's very obviously speaking about this time today, the latter days, the time of the end, shall the king of the south push at the king of the north, and the king of the north shall come against the king of the south like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. Well, that's the only way Daniel could say it at that time, but that means a complete military barrage. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. He shall also, we're talking about the king of the north now, he shall also enter into the glorious land. He shall enter into Jerusalem, that's the glorious land in Scripture, and many countries shall be overthrown. But this area you see on the screen right here, labeled as Ammon, Moab, and Edom. But these shall escape out of his hand, and they're named right here in the latter part of verse 41, where it says, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. And verse 42, the king of the north shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But the only place in the whole world that escapes the reach of the beast, as explained here in Daniel 11, verses 40, 41, 42, is this land in the map you see pictured here. We put the land of the chief of the children of Ammon on here. We put the land of Moab and the land of Edom. And you can see, very small print there, Petra is labeled right below that area that's part of Edom. So that's part of this triangulation that escapes the reach of the beast during the Great Tribulation. So, in the event we're not here Sunday night, you can look for me there, hopefully. Well, you know, unless there are other problems Sunday night. But if we disappear for a long time, you can maybe say, well, hey, Steve is off with that crazy group that God took to that land just east of the waterway that runs between. Let me put that back. I've described this to you, but I want you to be able to see it, because maybe just describing it doesn't quite give you the picture you need. You see all this triangulated area that's labeled here as Ammon and Moab and Edom. It's just east of that waterway. You see that big body of water right next to where it's labeled Ammon, just to the west of that label Ammon. That waterway that's between Israel and Jordan, that's the Lake Tiberias. And then that water runs south from there down to the Dead Sea. So when I describe it as being that land that's just east of that waterway that runs between Lake Tiberias and the Dead Sea, well, you can see it right there on the map. That's what we're talking about, that area right there, east of Israel, and in a little bit into Jordan. That's an area that God is going to have hands off for the beast during the Great Tribulation. It'll be out of the beast's reach. It'll be a protected area where God himself causes it to be protected for those he accounts worthy to escape the Great Tribulation. A goal well worth having, and a reminder to you, if you want to see the verse where that goal is contained, it's in, or that promise, that holding out of a carrot for those who watch and pray always. It's in Luke 21, verse 36. God says, do this, watch and pray always. Watch these events of the first 4 seals. When they intensify, beef up your prayers even more, that you may be accounted worthy to escape. All right, friend, that's all I'm going to say on that. That's it for this Thursday night edition of Nightcast. Again, God willing, the creek don't rise, and we're not over in the land east of Israel. Sunday night, we'll be back with the world's current world news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.